Welcome to the latest episode of the SQM Property Podcast with Louis Christopher here today. So, Louis, we've got a bit of an interesting topic for us today that I know a lot of people that are looking to purchase properties are kind of interested to hear about. And that is kind of the different buyers in the markets and how that shapes the current property market. So I might just start with a bit of an obvious question. Louis, in your opinion, generational divide in the property market's a bit of a hot topic. What are kind of the different buying behaviours that we see between kind of the main ones that most people talk about, which is the boomer generation, the millennial generation, and now coming into Gen Z, the Zoomers?
Well, definitely each generation's in its own stage in terms of the property cycle. So the boomer generation, they're getting on a bit now. They're in the mode of downsizing if they haven't done so already. In fact, probably the majority of the boomer generation now has been in the process of downsizing. The X generation, shall we say, they've basically got kids who are leaving school now, or actually are going into the workforce in terms of their kids, and soon the X generation will be doing downsizing themselves. The millennials, they're in the process of essentially perhaps upgrading. Maybe they've already bought a unit, and given the fact that they're now having their own families, they're probably looking to upgrade into perhaps a family home with a backyard, where many of them started off, say, buying, as mentioned before, buying a unit. And then the Z generation, well, they're predominantly renters right now, that's for sure, and they may well be, as part of this interest rate cutting regime that we've been having, looking to buy their first home, and that most likely will be a unit.
There's a lot of talk, particularly online, around, particularly in Australia, that for a lot of millennials and a lot of Gen Zers, that the dream of home ownership is a bit of a far off dream in a lot of cases. Do you think that is a lot of online speculation, or is there much evidence to kind of back up that?
There's plenty of evidence that real house prices, so after taking into account the effects of inflation, are at an all-time high. And they've been rising, and they've been rising against wages for some time now. The reality is, if we were to wind ourselves way back to the 1970s, you could buy in Sydney a freestanding house on a single income very easily. Wind forward, you want to buy say a median price unit, you're actually going to need more than just one income overall, just buying a unit. And certainly buying a house, most people have to do it on double incomes. So yes, there's been a real change in affordability, no question about that. But I must also say that I don't think it's impossible for Generation Z and millennials or any first home buyer not to get into the market. And I think, based on my own experience and the experience of my friends and family, it does feel extraordinarily tough to begin with, but it will work out. And I think people should have hope that, okay, if they're not there today, they will get there. No doubt there are parts of the capital cities where, hey, it's not going to be realistic you're going to be able to get in. But certainly there are other parts on all capital cities where you can get in. And certainly, it is easier, for example, to buy a unit as a first step.
To add to that, what are sort of some of the strategies? Now, obviously we know that, a lot of millennials and some of the Gen Zers now are obviously in some cases for the deposit resorting to the bank of mum and dad.
Yep.
But what are some of the other strategies that you would either suggest or that you've heard of that Gen Zs and millennials can look into in order to try and afford their first home?
I think and this is what happened with me when I bought my first home with my wife. We made a sacrifice on location. So we bought out in sticks in an area that was known to be definitely more affordable. We decided we didn't want to have a massive mortgage on our necks. So we decided to buy something relatively cheap, well within our budget. And that worked out for us. Yep, there were definitely times at the beginning, it's like, a bit of a struggle to make the mortgage. But over time, it did actually get easier as our family income grew and the mortgage repayments essentially remained the same or started to fall. So, yeah, I think sacrificing on location is not a bad sacrifice. Sacrificing on property type as well. Look, it's going to be hard, I think, for any first home buyer nowadays, especially for the capital cities, to buy a freestanding home straight off. But getting into the market, buying a unit, and when I say unit, I would definitely prefer an established unit over an off-the-plan unit because the inherent depreciation has already taken into account with an established unit. That is a good start.
No, that's good to know. I was going to sort of add to that. It seems like with the younger generations that there is a sort of decreasing move for young buyers to buy blocks of land or freestanding homes. I'm guessing that is just mainly due to price.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It boils down to a simple affordability stretch there in terms of people being able to make that purchase.
And sort of moving to the other end of the spectrum there, how are baby boomer and Gen X's downsizing decisions, how are they sort of impacting and influencing the market, particularly in kind of releasing family homes? Do you see that as maybe increasing specific property types?
Well, yes. I mean, downsizing has been occurring, but I would argue due to the transaction costs, the level or the magnitude of downsizing is not as high as what it could ultimately be. The issue, I think, for those empty nesters still in a large home, as an example, is that when they looked to do the downsizing, besides the emotional feelings of having to leave the family home that you've been living in for, say, the last 10, 20, 30 years, the transaction costs. So buying and selling, the transaction costs can be up to 8% of the value of the property. And so I think what runs through many people's minds is that because of that stamp duty effect, the agent costs, the conveyancing costs, they're essentially going to lose, for example, in Sydney, they'll easily lose $100,000 to $150,000 of real value in just doing a downsize in some respects. Now, of course, in absolute dollars, they'll have some more dollars in their pocket, but people do take into account, wow, this is a lot of real money we're going to lose just by doing this transaction. And I think that means that a lot of would-be downsizers hold off. Firstly, they're emotionally attached to the home they've been living in for many years, but second, the transaction costs make it even more difficult. And if there's one thing that we could do to help improve the liquidity in the market, encourage boomers to downsize, is to consider doing a stamp duty reduction, which would help reduce the transaction costs for all.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question, what we can do to help them there. Are there kind of any particular regions or property segments where this kind of boomer effect is the most pronounced? Does this create kind of any opportunities for other buyers as well? I mean, you mentioned that it's not the depreciation, the downsizing is not as much as it could be. But are we seeing any areas where there is potential for younger buyers?
Middle to outer rings of the capital cities are where we're seeing we have the bulk of freestanding homes, and particularly the middle ring of Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, you're seeing a bit of a reluctance from the boomers that are in those middle rings to sell up for the reasons I mentioned before.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving sort of to a bit of a different topic, when making a buying decision, the location versus land debate has been going on forever. It's a perpetual debate that always goes on. With the generational shifts, do you anticipate occupancies closer to the city, or do you see that the younger generations sort of would look to move further away for larger land versus a closer location?
Oh, I think first home buyers are, as mentioned before about the sacrifice of location, I think a lot of first home buyers do that anyway, and the move towards getting the right type of property is more ultimately important than location. And as a city's infrastructure improves, like for example here in Sydney, we've had the recent introduction of the metro. That's helped a lot in terms of decisions being made to live on the outer city rim.
Absolutely. And I certainly see it, particularly in obviously being a millennial myself.
Yeah.
I see it with a lot of my friends where they're sort of living on those outer rings, and you see them, a lot of people sort of moving to areas like Milpera, Revesby. There's a fewer people moving to like sort of the northern suburbs, the Hills district.
That's right.
Those sort of places, A, because it's more affordable, and B, because they can get those kind of larger properties, and the travel distance into the city is less and less.
Yep.
I also think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the impact of working from home post-COVID has also encouraged people to move further afield. Would you agree with that as well?
Absolutely, I would agree with that. And that trend will continue on, and it will continue on into regions outside the capital city. So, for example, once again in Sydney, hate to mention it again, we've seen a rapid growth on the Central Coast, in Newcastle, and down south in Wollongong, as well as the Blue Mountains. And I think the Blue Mountains will actually see more population growth compared to, for example, the middle ring of Sydney.
Wow, that's certainly an interesting thing for new buyers. And this is just, I guess, a little bit about us. How does SQM's kind of unique combination of demographics, analysis, and property data, how does that provide insights that some of our competitors rarely cover?
Yeah, we do demographics differently, and it's actually all free on our website. So often when people look at demographics, they might see, say, a pie chart or something, right? Age, sex, country of birth. What we do, and what we've been doing for a long time now, is that we've been collecting the census data since the 1990s. And so we actually provide, and it's free on our website, all you have to do is look at the demographics, the trends for every postcode, and we've got the cities there as well, over a longer period of time. So I'm a great believer in following the trend over a long term. And so we've got it all mapped out, literally for free, the demographic changes for every postcode in the country over that time frame.
And would you say that some of our other competitors out there maybe look at too shorter terms, or? Oh,
well, maybe even beyond our competitors. And I'm not directly familiar with competitors who are putting up demographic data, but the ABS, other sites, demographic sites, they tend to focus more on the shorter term, and that's okay. That's each to their own. But like I said, I love following the trend. And so hence the reason why we've got the data back for free in chart form all the way back to the early 90s.
And sort of what are the, looking at that data, what are the long-term trends that you foresee emerging as these generational buying patterns continue to evolve, particularly concerning kind of urban density and regional growth?
Well, number one, home buyers are getting older. So the average home buyer is definitely older. It's well and truly into the late 30s now. So we see that in the demographic data, that's for sure. Of course, there's been a higher proportion of people born overseas. We also track incomes over that length of time as well. And as mentioned before, incomes compared to housing prices, there's been more of a differential. But what we've also found in the trend is that those areas experiencing fast income growth also get very fast housing price growth. So they can be potentially areas for investors to consider buying for outperformance. So we've definitely seen that. The other a factor we've also seen as well is over the long term, the number of occupiers per property has been falling up until about COVID, and then it actually spiked up a bit, which is interesting. And what will be more interesting is to see what happens going forward. Can we expect the number of occupiers to rise? I think it will because of the affordability constraints. So more and more people sharing together is something that we're seeing right across the country.
Interesting. And what implications does this then have for developers and urban planners in terms of future housing needs and design for future town planning and that sort of thing?
Really, really good question. So we went through a period where a lot of one-bedroom units were being built because there was this notion that there'd be a lot more people living on their own. I think there's still that demand for that. But if I'm right about the fact we're going to see the number of occupiers increase per dwelling, then what we need to build more is like more three-bedroom dwellings out there. And I think that's what developers have been slowly doing. I have been seeing a higher ratio in new developments of three-bedroom apartments, and that potentially will continue on. For a developer's perspective, they get a better margin though when they build more one-bedrooms, because it's a higher price per square metre on a one-bedroom versus the price per square metre on a three-bedroom. But yeah, that's what's been happening on that front.
Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in. Please visit us again at sqmresearch.com.au. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.